Yesterday we sort of left off on the evaluation stuff, talking about basically this, oh, yeah, let's out of the way. Is that clear? Yeah. Clear? Valuation function. And today, this morning anyway, I want to talk about two problems. How to measure the value, and also the issue of how do we sort out which one to use. Remember, we had basically, if it's a positive change, reduce pollution, for example. Is reduced pollution a reduction of a loss, or is it a gain? Same thing with just about anything you want to mention. Is treating a sick child a reduction of a loss, or is it a gain? And the same thing on the negative side. So, you know, before we simply had the criteria. Willingness to pay refers to gains. Willingness to accept refers to losses, plain and simple. You know, the Pareto, potential Pareto criteria. But the issue now with reference dependence, that is that positive changes can either be in the losses or in the gains, and you have quite a different looking function in each. And that now causes a problem because positive changes can either be, you know, willingness to pay for a gain, or compensation demanded, or WTA, if it's a reduction of a loss. So it's important, particularly because the difference between the two numbers is likely to be very big, as we've seen. So we have a real problem here in sorting out when do you use which. And what we've done in the past, of course, is use WTP for everything. And I think that's basically not really defendable anymore, that the difference is too big, and that things could well be reductions of losses rather than gains on that side. So, yeah, we have this problem here that is it in the domain of gains, or is it in the domain of losses? And the other thing is to recognize that the WTA is just as legitimate as WTP. I mean, it is a monetary measure of a welfare change, full stop, just like WTP is. It's fully equivalent in terms of, you know, what it means. It's a monetary measure of a welfare change, just like, you know, both of them are. And the problem is, you know, no one has ever used the WTA, so consequently we don't really have very much experience in how to measure it even, and that's something I want to come back to as well. The other thing about things we're going to be talking about more today, particularly this morning, are more in the area of work in progress and speculations than yesterday. And as I said yesterday morning, that's intentional in a sense that a lot of you are interested in policy issues, others are interested in research topics and things like this. So we're going to have more of that, and it's going to start with the choice of measure issue. So what we have then is, this is just the same question. As I suggested yesterday, the characteristics of that value function are three things. One, that the curve is steeper in the area of losses than it is in the area of gains, and that gives, you know, that provides the reflects the fact that people value changes in the losses more than they value changes in the gains. So it's steeper in the losses. The second thing is that they have diminishing effect in both directions. That means that For example, if you offer people a choice between 80 for sure or a 0.8 chance of 100 and a 0.2 chance of 0, they go for the sure thing. There was even a group in Taiwan where I think every one of them that I tried this on, every one of them picked the sure thing. When you change the sign and deal in the losses, then you get a flip. People go for the risky sign, and that's because of the concavity in the gains and the convexity in the losses, right? So these two characteristics might give us a way to distinguish where we are in terms of a particular change. And that's basically what we've been dealing with. Now this is work in progress, and we haven't really fully tested it out and so forth. But one of the things we did was a couple of studies where we looked at changes in the gains, a positive change in the gains and a negative change in the gains, and a negative change in the domain of gains and losses. And the thing we used was changes in the risk of having a bicycle stolen in a parking lot on campus in where I was at the time, in Tianjin. What's the name of the university in Tianjin? Nankai. I was at Nankai visiting several times. And we did this study where we induced people to think about a change as a reduction of a loss or a gain by the wording. It's always been this way, and now suddenly the rate went up and stuff like that. And you notice that positive and negative changes in the gains are fairly close in terms of, let me start with the top one. That they're fairly close in terms of how much they're willing to, the value in terms of UN. Their willingness to pay for gains is fairly close. In the losses, they're also fairly close. But there's a big difference between the ones in the gains and the ones in the losses. So that might give us a way of distinguishing, if we have a different kind of thing, distinguishing whether they're gains or losses, changes in the gains or changes in the losses. We did another study where we used not money, but a scaler, a 1 to 20 bonded scale. We just said to it involved riverbank erosion along the Mekong River in northeast Thailand. So we asked farmers that had protection, some of the farmers had protection, other farmers didn't have protection. And riverbank erosion was apparently a very serious problem in that stretch of the Mekong. So they were aware of what the issue was. So we asked farmers with protection how much they would be willing to pay, to rate the importance of not losing their protection. Or then we set up a thing and their protection is breaking down or useless, or I've forgotten how we worded it. And then how much would they value getting it back? And this sort of thing. So that's how we sort of framed the issue. And then we did the opposite with the farmers without protection. So these were farmers who, in fact, were experiencing either protection or no protection, and then we asked them about changes in their status. And again, what we found was in the gains, they rated them positive changes and negative changes in the gains pretty close. Similarly in losses, pretty close, but big differences between the two. So that, again, that may give us a clue as to how we might distinguish whether they're in the gains or in the losses. So one of the things we did was to run a survey on, I think these were Thai University students. And we said that there's a roadblock, they travel out on the road every day to work or to school or something like that. One day there's a road blockage stopping traffic. And I think we just, this is on a 0 to 20 scale again. How important is that? It's clearly a loss. So 15 out of 20 was their scalar value on that. Then we said, how important is clearing the loss? So in other words, reducing the loss. Pretty close to the loss. So they must consider clearing the loss, or clearing the road, sorry, as a reduction of the loss, because it's pretty close to what they valued the loss at. So this is a potential way of distinguishing whether clearing the road, which is a positive change, they consider it as a reduction of a loss, not a gain. If it were a gain, it would be much, much less than that 15.4. But it's about the same as the 15.4. In fact, there was no statistically significant difference between the two. So this is a way, an indirect way of determining whether that positive change of clearing the road is considered by people as a gain or a reduction of a loss. Now, can we do the same thing with, say, an oil spill? How do people consider clearing an oil spill? Is it a gain or is it a reduction of a loss? Well, one way is to do something like we just did for the road clearing. And if they say that the clearing the oil spill is about the same value to them or importance to them as having it happen, then that's pretty good evidence that maybe they consider it as a reduction of a loss. Similarly, treating a sick child. Is that a gain or is that a reduction of a loss? Again, we're talking about a positive change, but we need to know which domain it is because the value depends on the domain. If it's in the domain of gains, then it's WTP. If it's in the domain of losses, it's WTA. So it's important to sort this out. And at the present, we don't really have a good way of doing that. We can argue about it, and is reducing pollution in Beijing a gain, or is that a reduction of a loss? To take a random example. No, we were talking about this last night, that's why. So is that a gain, or is that a reduction of a loss? Just out of curiosity, knowing nothing more than in Beijing, they've had heavy pollution for many, many years, right? And that's pretty common knowledge. Now, if they were to reduce the pollution, would people consider that as a gain, or would they consider that as a reduction of a loss? I'm just curious. How many of you think it would be a gain? How many of you think it would be reducing a loss? Sorry? Reducing of a loss. Even though most of the people who live in Beijing, I'm guessing, have never seen, without pollution. Is that accurate? I mean, it's been heavily polluted for many, many, many years. So many of the people, I'm sure, who live in Beijing who have never really seen clean air, I'm guessing. So, so what we're suggesting here is maybe we can do better than just sort of have our own ideas about whether it's a gain or a reduction of a loss. So we're looking for some sort of objective way of making that discrimination, and that's what we're proposing here. But there's another one that we can go back and, okay, what that first test was is that changes in the gains tend to be much smaller than changes in the losses. So if we can show that the reduction of a loss is valued roughly the same as having a loss, then that's evidence that we're over here. And similarly, if it's not similar, then it's evidence that clearing the road is considered as a gain. So that's one way of doing it. But notice that people in the losses tend to go for the risky choice, whereas people in the gains go for the sure thing, the certainty. You know, like you guys demonstrated yesterday. When I said you can have 80 for sure, or you can have a 0.8 chance of 100, all of you went for the 80 for sure. So you went for the sure thing in the gains. But when I changed it to the losses, almost all of you went for the risky choice. And that's, again, due to the convexity and the concavity of the value function. So that's another way we can take, as a characteristic of the value function, that gives us a way, possibly, again, let me remind you, this is work in progress. I'm not claiming this is a sure thing. But so far, I think it looks extremely promising, and I'll show you some numbers in a minute. So, again, we can look at the characteristic of the value function, and if people go for the certainty, then that's pretty good evidence that they're going for that it's a change in the gain. If they go for the losses, then it's pretty good evidence that they're probably going. If they go for the risky choice, that's pretty good evidence that they consider the change in the losses. So we tried that. Let me show you some numbers on it. Okay, we did some of these we did in Thailand, some of them we did in Vietnam, and I was just looking to see which. I think we did this one in Thai students. Yeah. Okay, we basically asked the same question that I asked here yesterday morning. That when we asked them, which would they choose, A or B? A certain 80, in fact, I used the same numbers as I used yesterday morning, and or an 80% chance to get 100 and a 20% chance of getting nothing. And again, overwhelmingly, they went for the sure thing. So they considered that as a gain. And then when you put it in the losses, they went for the risky choice. So then what we did was to say, okay, you're agreed to take part in a two-part exercise involving the chance of losing or gaining money. And in the first group of people, there were only, these are small samples, these are classroom people, and we did this one in Vietnam. And as you know, the dong is not worth a whole lot, so these numbers look pretty big. I think it's 200 and something thousand to US dollar, something like that. Anyone from Vietnam? Anyway, it's big exchange rate. So this is not a lot of money. Okay, you've agreed to take part in this two-part exercise. And then you tell them, in the first part, you didn't win or lose. You broke even. So we didn't want to anchor them anywhere. So they're starting from basically the status quo. And then we gave them a choice. Would you like, if you're given, sorry, you have a choice between certain 800,000 dong, or B, an 80% chance of 1 million dong, and a 20% chance of nothing. And most people went for the sure thing. It's in the gains again. Again, remind you, this is a very small sample. Then we did the same thing with the losses. And we said, again, you've taken, two-part deal. The first part you broke even. Now, you have to either pay 800 dong for sure, for certain, or you're offered the chance of paying 1 million or 20% chance of not having to pay anything. And overwhelmingly, they went for the risky choice. So it's, we're dealing in the losses. Then, and this is the critical one, of course, we said, okay, again, you've taken part in a two-part deal. In the first part, you lost 1 million. So we anchored them, tried to anchor them in the losses. Now we're saying there's a positive change. You can either be given 800 for with certainty, or 1 million, 80% chance of 1 million and 20% chance. The same offer is up here. Here they were clearly in the gains, but notice here, it's a loss reduction. It's still a positive change. It's the same offer, but we've anchored them in the losses. So what we've effectively done is to say to the first group, you're here, and now we're offering you a gain. And they treated it as a gain by saying they wanted the sure thing, the certainty. The other group, the last group, we've anchored them in the losses by telling them they lost in the first part of this exercise. Now we're offering them the same positive change, but now they value it as a reduction of a loss. So that's the deal. Does that work? It clearly worked in this simple example here. So we then went on and tried to test it further with a VSL deal. So the first question they got was the accidental death rate has been 6 per 100,000 for many years. So that's their sort of reference point, or we're trying to adduce that as their reference. And then say there could be a change from 6 to 9 per. In other words, it's been 6 for years. And if it goes from 6 to 9, that's clearly a loss for certain. Or you can have a risky chance of a negative change by a 50% chance of going from 6, which is now, to 12, or a 50% chance to stay at 6. Now, because they're in the losses, they go for the risky choice. And the accidental rate for many years has been 12 per 100,000. So we tried to anchor them at 12. And now say there's a chance of a positive change. This is a negative change, positive change. Going from 12 to 9 with certainty, or a 50% chance to go from 12 to 6, and a 50% chance to stay at 12. Most people took that. So again, what it seems to be saying is that if they feel that they're in the losses and you offer them a positive change, in the case of accidental death rate, then they treat it as a reduction of a loss. Now, that's as much as we've tested this empirically. What we obviously need to do is far more testing of this thing, but it so far is looking pretty pretty good. That may be a way to, rather than sit around and argue about whether it's one or the other, to have some objective way of doing this. Now, what we need to test is, can you sort of undermine the thing by sort of, if you set it up this way, you'll always get the answer you want, kind of thing. And we need to test that. Otherwise, obviously people would try to cheat and rig it. But so far, it's looking pretty good, as I say. So what we need to do is, how do you design the questions and so forth? And not all of them are as easy as the one I had here. We need to do something about that. One of the things I was complaining about yesterday was why, if it's obvious that people ought to use WTA, and they don't, and I'll give you an example here in a few minutes, why? And one of the things that I think we might think about in terms of policy is when you do whatever, a benefit cost analysis, a damage assessment, whatever you're doing to try to estimate the value of something, some change, that the drill, if you're doing a benefit cost analysis, there are rules to do how to do a benefit cost analysis that's kind of believable, right? You have to do this. You have to have a discount rate of so much, and you have to be above board about it. If you're serious about doing benefit cost analysis, this is what people do. And most governments have manuals about how to do a benefit cost analysis for road improvement or whatever the stuff is. Well, maybe we ought to make, as part of those kind of manuals, the requirement that you have to show the justification for using either WTA or WTP. Just make that explicit. Make them, whoever does a benefit cost analysis, make them say, we use WTP because we knew we could get away with it. I mean, you don't care what they say, but they've got to say it. And if they say, we just think we could fool people, then people can, no, you're not going to fool me, and ask them. No, make them come out, because they have to make a choice, just like they have to make a choice for a discount rate. Make them say why they used the discount rate that they did. That's common. Why did they use the VSL number that they did? That's common. But what is not common is why they use WTP and not WTA, or vice versa. So just as an institutional rule, seems to me that would have great appeal. Because once you get people having to commit why they did something, then, then they think about it. If they just go along, well, everybody else uses WTP, so we did, and not have to justify it, I don't see any end to people using WTP. But if we make them justify it, just like they have to justify an interest rate choice, discount rate choice, maybe that would have some impact. And it's it's a reform that's cheap, zero. Except analysts won't want it, of course, because they don't want to do it. But I think if governments are serious about getting good information, it seems like this is a cheap and easy way to do it. I'm not taking bets that I'll ever see anybody doing it, but it seems to me a reasonable thing to suggest to people. The other thing I want to mention, and this is pure speculation. In other words, I'm guessing. one of the sort of defenses of using WTP for most things is that it's only rare that we would expect WTA to be the appropriate measure. I mean, you hear that as a defense of using WTP. That most things are in fact positive changes, and positive changes are almost always WTP, they're gains, not in fact reflecting losses. And they don't bother even testing. There's a very, well, looks like influential paper by Kip Viscusi. And those of you who have done any work in VSL, value of statistical life, are familiar with Kip's work. Kip is a very capable guy and a nice guy. We often disagree on things, but by and large, we see eye to eye on things. Anyway, he and somebody else, I've forgotten the other guy's name, I didn't know him, wrote a paper in which they suggested that there was no difference in VSL for increases or decreases in the chances of death. And they did a study. Okay, Kip does a lot of studies using the wage risk stuff, data. In other words, you get data, I think I mentioned it yesterday, you get data on the wage rate for people who work in different jobs with different risk associated with the jobs. And what they find is that people who are in everything, controlling for everything else, jobs which pose higher risk of death to the workers, those workers are paid more than people who have similar jobs in but lower rates of death, accidental death in the job. So if you can establish a relationship between the risk and the extra pay that people get as a result of the risk, then you have, a value of the risk. And Kip has argued for many years that that's a better way of doing it than asking people how much would you pay for a change, a small change in the risk of death. So anyway, he has taken his risk, job, and employment data, and what he did was to look at the change in the wage for jobs going from a smaller risk to a larger risk. And then he looked at jobs that or people who changed jobs going from a higher risk job to a lower risk job. And he found that the wages were different in the high risk and the low risk, but there was no statistically significant difference between the ones going this way and the ones going that way. He concluded from that study that people don't value increases or decreases in the risk of death differently, that the gain-loss thing doesn't apply to VSL. And it's a very influential paper with all kinds of people quoting it and saying that there's no problem here. But of course, what's going on here is that what he's measured is increases in the risk, a loss, and decreases of the risk, which he's interpreting as a gain, but in fact could be a reduction of the loss. He didn't test that. And nobody has called him on it. So people are saying, there's no difference between the two because Kip says there's, his data shows no difference. But he really didn't show any difference. All he showed was that there's no difference between here and here. And you wouldn't expect a difference. Positive and negative changes in the same domain tend to be valued the same, as we saw with the earlier data. So I think the jury is still out. In fact, that study that we did suggests that, in fact, people treat reductions of losses, in fact, the same as losses. and that there probably is a big difference between gains and losses. So it's important to make this distinction because, as Kip's paper showed, I mean, people just glom onto it and use it in policy discussions and so forth. But they haven't really done the tests that they said they did. Now, in terms of sort of, where the thing I was going to mention is sort of speculation. It's looking like, and again, let me emphasize, I really have no hard data to back this up, not much anyway. It looks like there's a possibility that when you're dealing with something that people consider a bad thing, illness, loss of, employment losses and things like this, environmental degradation, traffic congestion, and so forth and so on. Things that people think are bad things, not good things. That when you deal with the changes, positive changes for those kind of things overwhelmingly seem to be treated by people as changes in the losses. But when you say we're dealing with sick children, well, reductions of the treatment of the illness of sick children, people just pick up and treat it as a change in the losses because sick kids are a bad thing, not a good thing. Kids aren't supposed to be sick, is people's reference. If that's true, then a lot of things that we deal with, think about what do governments spend most of their time worrying about? Well, they spend an awful lot of their time on bad things. Medical stuff. They don't spend the time, how to make people super healthy. They spend time and money treating injuries and sickness. On traffic, why do we build more roads or widen roads or so forth? To try to relieve congestion, so forth. Anyway, if you think about what governments do, what collective actions are all about, huge numbers of it, proportions, are dealing with the bad, how to make life a little easier for people. And if my speculation is even close to being accurate, then it looks like most of the things we deal with really ought to be thought about in terms of willingness to accept, not willingness to pay. So again, if all of this is true, and again, this is speculation on my part, that we have a serious problem of a bias in how we handle things as a society. That by understating the value of losses, people's valuations of losses, and reductions of losses, we're going to have more losses around. We're not going to deal with losses. So, it seems to me a very serious policy issue that we ought to get this straight. And I think the economists' reluctance to buy into this comes with a very high price. In other words, if we're doing it systematically wrong, and we're doing it systematically wrong because economists can't get their head around the fact that they've been doing it wrong, then then that's imposing a huge cost on society because we have to put up with more things in the losses and not have them dealt with adequately. So, I'm not arguing for a political position. I'm just saying, if you want to look at the numbers, this is what the numbers seem to be showing us. That doesn't say you have to, pay attention and do everything according to the numbers. I'm not suggesting that at all. But if you're going to take the numbers at all seriously, this is what the numbers seem to be showing. Maybe someday we'll have enough numbers to do this. There's one further thing that was actually two things I wanted to mention. Yeah, one is an example of the use of WTP, a rather curious example, and something that Echo and I have been talking about. You probably all remember the huge oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico, the British petroleum spill. 3 years ago, 4 years ago, whenever it was. Huge thing. This deep water well in the Gulf of Mexico, and it sort of blew apart or something, and huge quantities of oil spilled all over the Gulf of Mexico, washed up on beaches and so forth and so on. Apparently the biggest oil spill in the history of North America or something like that. It was huge. And they did a study, and I wasn't aware of this study until just a couple of months ago. And what the NOAA, which is the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Authority or agency or something in the U.S., looks after this kind of stuff, like valuing changes in the environment and stuff like that. Anyway, they commissioned a study, and the study was done by well, the authors of the study, there were 20 authors of this study, including a lot of very prominent people in environmental economics. I think there were 5 of them were fellows of the association and things like that. Anyway, very establishment group. And they had allegedly a couple of $1 million to do this study. I can't conceive of having $2 million to do anything. Anyway, but they had essentially unlimited resources. And what they wanted to do was to come up with the value, the loss associated with that huge spill. So what they did is to look at, okay, what happened was, okay, there was a big spill, clearly a loss, right? I mean, even without any objective way of doing this, most people would argue an oil spill of that magnitude is clearly considered by people to be a loss. A loss, of course, should be valued in terms of WTA, right? I mean, there's just no question about this one, I don't think. However, what these people did was not to value it in terms of WTP. What they did was to say, okay, there's going to be a bunch of new wells drilled in the Gulf of Mexico in the next 15 years. And experts have determined that one of those wells will blow up like the BP well did and create an enormous spill equal to that. It could be prevented by all of these wells being equipped with a second pipe that goes down. I don't know how this works, but it involves running another pipe, which of course costs a lot of money. So how much basically what they said was, how much would the second pipe would prevent that one loss that will occur with certainty if they don't do it? How much would you be willing to pay to have those pipes installed? So that was the question they asked. And then there was a national survey, and they came up with 13 billion, what is it? Oh, here it is. Putting a value on injuries of natural assets, the BP oil spill, it's $13 billion. It's the 13 point something billion dollars. But notice what they've done. What is clearly a loss, and losses clearly should be measured, valued in terms of WTA, right? And that, if you're going to pay at all any attention to the principles, I mean, this is clear. it has to be WTA. What they've done is to change the issue. They're not valuing the BP spill. They're saying, if we had another spill like that, how much would you pay to prevent it? So they managed to turn the thing around and make it sound like a gain. And gains, of course, are, WTP. So off they went to the races to measure WTP and came up with $13 billion. And the article is published in Science, one of the most prestigious publications in the world. That's what's going on. And I don't understand it. Well, unfortunately, I think I do understand it. But it, if we're going to pay attention, science of all places, if we're going to pay attention to how science works, this isn't how science is supposed to work. So anyway, this is how life is. This is what's happening in the thing. Now, how would you measure that? Well, even in terms of if we prevent another loss like this, how would you measure that? Even that should be measured not in terms of WTP. It isn't how much are you willing to pay to prevent another spill. The proper measure of preventing another spill is how much do you have to be compensated not to prevent another spill. That's the proper measure of that, because you're in the losses. So you want, how much do you have to pay people to stay on the same indifference curve as you are now? How much do you have to pay people not to prevent that spill? In other words, so that they, even with the spill, they're still on the same indifference curve. That's the proper measure of a loss. And that's going to be a lot of money, right? Now, why are we, doing this? So the proper measure is WTA, not WTP. So that brings me to one last very speculative thing. And it is, one of the objections to using WTA is there's no good way of doing it. That we're confident, people say, I think, being a little charitable, that they have confidence that if you ask people in the proper way how much they're willing to pay for something, that they can get a reasonably good answer and a reasonably good estimate. Maybe. Certainly they can, get a number. That's one of the problems. They always get a number, and you don't know whether it's any good or not. But anyway, we've been doing this now for years and years and years, officially and whatever. But if you ask people how much they would have to be paid, they really have trouble answering that question. That's the argument. Again, there may be ways of asking the question that's easier and so forth, dichotomous choices and stuff like that. However, I've been mulling the possibility of a different way of doing it. Remember how we estimate VSL? We don't say how much do you value a life. We say how much do you value a very small chance of ending a life. I wonder if we could do the same thing with an oil spill. In other words, not ask people how much do you have to be paid to have an oil spill like the one that happened in the Gulf of Mexico, but instead ask the question, how much do you have to be paid for a 1 in 1,000 chance increase in the chance of an oil spill? Just like we do for VSL. Now we can't, as we said yesterday, you can't walk up to somebody and say, how much would you pay, how much would I have to pay you to end your life? People have trouble answering that question, right? So what we do is, how much would I have to pay you to have a 1,000% chance, 1 in 1,000 chance increased chance of ending your life? That they might answer. And that's what we do. I mean, we do it the other way, how much they're willing to pay, but they probably could answer it either up or down. Well, maybe they could do the same thing with an oil spill. So you don't ask them, how much would we have to pay you to have another oil spill like the one that they had, but how much would we have to pay you to increase the chance of having such an oil spill by 0.001% or whatever? Could people answer that? That's, thinking about it a little bit, all of 20 minutes. Seems to me that that's a possibility. And if it is, if people buy into the idea that VSL is okay, and they do, in spite of the fact everybody knows it has lots of problems, but they buy into it because it gives us, a pretty good objective way of valuing saving lives. Well, maybe we could do the same thing for things like oil spills and pollution and, all sorts of environmental things. Don't know. Haven't tried it, but I'm, thinking about it. Why wouldn't it work? I think I could answer, if somebody asked me, how much would I have to be paid? You can do the same drill with dichotomous choices and so forth. The best way to ask the question, would I be willing to pay $10 to reduce the chances of an oil spill by some small amount? Or would I accept $10 to allow them to increase the probability by some very tiny amount? I think people could answer that question. I don't know that, but I think they could. If they could, then we could get an objective value. If people buy into VSL, then they would have a hard time saying they won't buy into this for an oil spill. So it might be a way of doing this. Again, this is purely speculative. I have not tried it. Whatever, but I think it is worth a try. And it might get us around one of the chief arguments about why people don't use the right measure, that it's too hard to get it, so forth. Anybody want to try that, by the way, let me know. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Excuse me, I have a question because I have read some papers in this field about VSL, and there's a common concern that when you ask people these kind of questions, they have difficulties in feel the micro reduction of the risk. For example, 1/1000 may have very little differences with 1/10,000. So how do you persist?
No, that's one of the problems of the VSL. That we talked about people's insensitivity to changes in small chances, and that's one of the problems of doing the VSL this way. That you could get different answers by the percentage you choose. You're absolutely right. I think it's a serious problem. But people seem to overlook it for VSL, and they sort of come to some agreement that if you do it like this, then we'll sort of buy into it. It's, no, it is a problem, I agree. But it's no more a problem in the environmental area than it is in VSL. And if people buy VSL, then it seems like they would have a hard time denying using it for the environment. No, you're right. This is a problem. There are a lot of problems with it. It assumes, for example, that it's a linear relationship, that the value of changing from 1% to 2% is the same as 93% to 94%. It's linear. Well, everyone knows it's probably not linear. But we say, okay, we know that, but we'll use it anyway, because it's the best we have. So if you buy it for VSL, why won't you buy it for... No, it is a problem. It's why Kip Viscusi says, let's go with the risk employment data on it. In North America and the U.S., principally because of Kip Viscusi, most people tend to use the wage stuff, wage risk stuff. In Europe and most of the rest of the world, people rely on contingent valuation estimates of it. To the extent that this, maybe we could find a way of finding the same thing as the wage thing in the environment. I don't know where, nothing occurs to me, but if we could find something comparable. But the idea is to try to estimate the value that people place on a small risk, rather than try to ask them, the whole oil spill, just like, how much do you value your life? People can't answer that. But the small changes in the possibility of ending the life, they can handle. And if we could find ways like the wage stuff for environment, that would be great. I can't think of any at the moment, but that would give us something to look for. But meanwhile, we might be able to use the contingent valuation way of doing it the same way as they do it in VSL.
I have a follow-up question. I think I find the people are very difficult to distinguish between the, say, 1 in 10 or 1 in 1,000 or 1 in million change of probability.
Yeah.
They cannot tell what's 1 in 1,000, 1 in 1 million. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So is it possible to ask just what's your willingness to be paid for the last oil spill? For the last one he has experienced in Mexico Gulf. Yeah, experienced. Yeah, those people live there and then they have been experienced. So that's a sure. That's a for sure. They know for certain what's the damage it is. Yeah. Then they don't need to be asked to be evaluate the probability. Probability, something that kind of thing is people cannot tell. People cannot tell.
No, that's right. That's basically your question. People they're insensitive to that changes in small probability. They can't distinguish. That's been a problem. That's been a problem with the VSL too, on it. If we could find a place, and the thing you suggest, may offer a possibility. I think it's a general issue. Can we find some reliable way of estimating values of small changes, and then we can do the VSL trick and blow it up to the total spill or the total whatever? Yes. Can you find is there a microphone? Is there a microphone somewhere?
Yeah. 每一个位置都有。按一下红色。
I faced a similar question. So in the past, I have doing study to evaluate the people's willingness to pay for avoid allergy, possibility for get allergy from the genetic modified good food. So in this case, I say if you have reduced 100% of your allergy, so I change to the expected days. Like if I have reduced the risk of your 10,000 risk, 10,000, 1/10,000 risk to be premature death, then I will try to get like 10,000, 1/10,000 probability times the expected the life days, like 30,000 days.
Yeah, that's how they do the VSL, yeah.
Yeah, I usually do, but then I just give them that probably that's 3 days. Because people say we only have, if we 80 years old, then we probably have 30,000 days. So I just calculate the probability, to calculate the possibility become days.
Oh.
Like you can have 3 days more or 30 days more to live. I just changing the probability become the days.
Yeah.
Expected life days. So I don't know if that's okay, but I think that's easier to perceive than small probability.
Yeah, people have proposed all kinds of ways around these kind of problems. Whether they work around, I'm not sure. I haven't done that much in it myself. No. But yeah, I mean, everyone is searching for a way around those kinds of problems, and the way you're suggesting may do it. I don't know. Honestly, but I think that's, again, what you're doing is along the lines of what I'm suggesting. Maybe we ought to be looking for ways. Give up trying to get people to say, what the value of your life is, or what the value of that big oil spill is, but give them an easier question to answer. And that's what you've tried to do, and that's what I think I'm basically suggesting, is that if we could ask people about the changes in the probability, small changes in the probability, maybe, one of the things we probably would want to do is, are people really, really sensitive to changes in very, very small probabilities? And, the evidence basically is they're not very sensitive. Well, maybe they're more sensitive to slightly bigger gaps, not way down low, but maybe a little higher. I don't know. I think it's sort of an empirical question. Are there ways in which we could find ranges that people are sensitive to? And my guess is they're more sensitive in some areas than other areas. I don't know that. That's just a guess on my part at the moment. But I think if we sort of looked, and it wouldn't be hard to, run a bunch of tests to see if we could find such areas, and then, that would help. That would help a lot. Anyway, it's just another way of trying to get around a problem. I don't think. Looking back at what I've been doing for the last 50, 60 years, or however many years, valuation has been at the center of almost all of it. Trying to figure out ways of doing it. I did a lot of hedonic stuff. I did a lot of willingness to pay, travel costs and so forth. Trying to figure out ways of getting values out of people, kind of thing. And it's, there's no perfect way. But I think we can make progress. I think we can do a lot better than we're doing, honestly. Yeah.
I have a question about your last slide. That's about beds. Yeah, bed. Yeah.
Which one?
Yeah.
Or
No, the bed. A lot of beds, yeah, like such as illness or sickness or air pollution or climate change. Yeah. And you say this is a big deal for the government, a very important business of the government to prevent or to reduce beds. But the question is, what kind of measure we like to have is it willingness to pay or willingness to accept? Depends on the reference point.
Yeah.
Depends on the reference point. For example, for climate change, the reference point may be is a normal climate. And then in the future, we will face a big change. So that's if we can prevent that change, then that's a positive. That's a positive or negative. Positive change.
Positive change in the
losses. It is a gain. It is a gain. No?
No, it's a positive change in the losses, a reduction of a loss.
Reduction of loss.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's WTA.
Okay, yeah, okay. Then air pollution. Then we talk about air pollution. Then you have mentioned, we have discussed that about air pollution in Beijing. Yeah, we know that. And we suppose Beijing has been air polluted for many, many years. And then people are used to this kind of bad air quality, very bad air quality. Then that's their reference point. Their reference point is bad air quality.
We don't know that.
Then if that's the case, then clean up or air pollution control, then that's a gain.
That's a gain.
That's a gain. But for other cities, say in Yunnan, or with a very good air quality in the last 10 years or 20 years, then air pollution, that's a loss. So I think that depends on the air quality they are used to. Yeah, just like you say, for children in a classroom, some classmates then like to hit him every day. Hit him. What's that? Bully him every day. Then that's the reference point. So a change from bully or not bully, then that's a gain. That's a gain. Yeah. So that's what I'm thinking about.
Yeah. This is a discussion we started last night. So far, we have a bet. If I win, I get his house. If he wins, he gets my house. But no, I don't accept that at all. I think that's why it's so important to get a way of determining reference points, because otherwise we're going to have endless discussions. Some people are going to say any positive change is a gain. But as we saw, if you're beating me over the head and you stop, that's not a gain, that's a reduction of a loss. Clearing traffic that's been stopped as a result of whatever, clearing the road is not a gain, it's a reduction of the loss. Okay, those things just happened recently. What if the road has been blocked for years? Would they still consider that as a gain, or would it be a reduction of a loss? We don't know. That's why we need a way to determine. Otherwise, we're going to argue endlessly and nothing's going to happen. Yeah, we've got to have a way of determining this, rather than flipping a coin or arguing, or whoever's stronger or whatever wins. We should be looking for a way to determine. That's why I am sort of interested in this issue of might this be a way of doing it? If it is, I think it would be a big help. It would settle our argument. But first we have to agree that the method will in fact give us the right answer, and we don't know that yet. All I'm saying is this is something that looks promising. If we do enough tests to show that, yeah, it does seem to discriminate in ways that make sense, then we might accept it. Then we could settle this argument. That's why I think it's so important. And that's why it's so frustrating that other people don't seem to think it's a big deal at all, that the problem is a big deal. I think it is. I think it's a very important thing that we need to do.
And how do you suggest that we could test it?
Pardon me?
The reference point. And for example, the reference point in the pollution of Beijing, and how do you suggest that we could test it?
I'm not sure that I have a direct test now, but I think I can determine it. One that just strikes me as very, just like we sort of induced that people stealing bicycles and the river thing. I think we can induce reference points sufficiently strong to provide test. I don't know that, but that's my first reaction. Is that I think we could do it, but I'm not sure yet exactly how to do it. I haven't obviously tested anything of doing it, but my intuition is that that's probably doable. But I'm not sure of that on a thing. But yeah, we would have to get a test, and it has to be pretty objective that everybody agrees that that's a legitimate test. Otherwise, it looks like it's just self-serving. We're trying to get more whatever on the thing. So it's got to be something that people will recognize as being legitimate. Just like a coin flip, an honest coin, people accept as legitimate for settling something. But we want to do a little better than that for determining public policy on it. Any other comments? Anyone have a solution to this kind of issue? Yeah. Oh, there's another sort of thing related. The BP spill study, the one that these 20 people wrote or did, what they said that the value that they have, which they claim is the value that people place on the loss of the damage caused by the spill, that provides information in terms of how much can be spent remedying the spill or preventing another spill. In other words, they valued it at $13.2 billion, I think was the number, whatever it was. So say $13 billion. Okay, if they are confident that people value this thing at $13 billion, that they're willing to pay $13 billion to prevent it, that says that, okay, if they have a plan that would prevent it that costs $13 billion, they ought to go ahead and do it. So asking if the law says the only way you can do this is for the people who are taxpayers have to pay for it, not BP, but the taxpayers will say. If the law says, in other words, the property rights belong to, are allocated in such a way that the only way you can stop it is for taxpayers to pay for preventing it. The BP doesn't have to pay for it if they drill more things, that the law says you can drill without protection. If you want protection, the taxpayers have to pay for it. If that's what the law says, then a study that says how much are you willing to pay is a useful study because it tells you whether it's worthwhile, whether people are willing to pay taxes to do this. However, this doesn't mean that's the value of the loss. It just says this is what they're willing to pay if they have to. They're different. And in fact, this study then might say, well, this is the law now, but this is a crazy law because it only allows us to prevent, let's say that it costs $13 billion to prevent the spill, and that the value of the loss in terms of WTA of people is $40 billion, just for a number. Or, well, let me change the first part. Let's say that people are willing to pay $13 billion. It costs $20 billion to put in the prevention. the loss, if it occurs, and it's certain to occur, people value at 40. What happens? They don't put it in because the people aren't willing to pay enough to put it in, but if it happens, there's going to be a huge loss in welfare. Assume all the numbers are right, just for argument's sake. See the problem? So maybe what we ought to do, this is an argument to change the law so that we are, that the rights to clean water belong to the taxpayers, and therefore anybody who threatens to create oil spills has to pay for it. The way the law is now, or the way the question is asked, assumes that the law is taxpayers have to pay for it. They're the ones who would suffer if there were a spill. But they're only willing to pay $13 billion, and it costs $20 billion, so they don't do it, and we have a spill that they value at 40. So you don't want that to happen because that's a huge loss. So if you change the law, making BP put it in regardless of the cost, they'll put it in if it pays them to put it in. If the price of oil is too low, they won't put it in, you won't have a spill. But if it's profitable to put it in, they'll be forced to put it in, and there will be no spill. And we won't lose that $40 billion. So getting a value, asking people how much they're willing to pay if the law says they have to pay for it, that's necessary. We have to do that. But we should not take that as a number of the value. The value is the WTA number, and that's 40 in my little story. So I think this is the sort of dilemma. People are taking these things as the value, and they're not. They're only how much people have to pay if they have to. And maybe we should change the law so that they don't have to. Then we'll get something closer to a social optimum. So when I become king, you have a question?
President.
Yeah. No, I don't want to be president. I want to be king. Yeah. Did you have a question? Comment?
Yeah, I think this is it's very important. It's very important. That's the definition of property rights, or the assignment of property rights. If the public, the question is if the public owned a clean, the right to have a clean environment, or the polluters, or the BP, or BP has the right to pollute. And that's a difference. It's a huge difference, and then can change the reference point.
It'll influence the reference. It'll influence the reference point in some cases, probably a lot, but not necessarily determine the reference point.
Okay.
In fact, I would argue the causation is stronger the other direction. That the reference point determines the law, rather than the law determines the reference point.
Yeah, okay. And in the past, we have observed that this kind of change of property rights in the past. For example, air quality. In the past, before we have Air Pollution Act, then firms, they are free. They are free to emit air pollutants or water pollution.
That's right.
Yeah, then we have law, then they cannot. They have to get a permits to do that. That means that's a change of property rights.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for oil spill, that's a similar.
It's a huge.
So up to now, they are, and the BP, like oil companies, they have the right to pollute, to spill oil. So the government, it's a government's responsibility to clean up.
Clean up.
That's not correct. That's not correct. Yeah.
But Coase theorem say that it doesn't really matter the assignment of the property right.
And
Value is different. Value is very different. Yeah.
And everybody who believes that Kosarim's right, raise their hand. No, this is a very, very important point. That there's another complication too, and we run into it in Canada all the time. We make mining companies, for example, responsible for cleaning up their mess after they close down a mine. Well, we have a lot of mines in British Columbia because we have a lot of stuff that they dig up. And what often happens is they have a big settling pool, dam burst or something like that, and all this crud spills into the rivers and kills all the fish and all that sort of thing. It happens regularly. And what happens is, the mining company is responsible. Yeah, but they go out of business. They're bankrupt. Now, the government, I don't know why, we don't come up with an institution, effectively a bond. In other words, if you want to mine, you have to take out a bond so that if there's a problem, even if you go out of business, there's a bond that'll pay for the cleanup. Why we don't do that simple thing? Well, I know why, because the politicians are bought off by the mining companies not to do it. But it's so easy to fix, but taxpayers get stuck time after time after time doing this. If there is a big disaster, they declare bankruptcy, and taxpayers are left to pay for this. There was an interesting case. There was I forgot what it was. I think it may have been a gold mine up in the Yukon in Canada, and they had huge labor problems. There were riots and it was just, there was a strike that went on for over a year and this sort of thing. So they had serious problems. They brought in this president of the company, and she just sort of whacked everybody, got them straightened out. The mine opened again. They finally, mined all the stuff that they could get out of the thing, left a horrible mess around the place, and somehow maneuvered the government into cleaning the whole thing up, which cost millions and millions of dollars to do this. Later, she was elected Executive of the Year by the mining companies. Normally you would expect Executive of the Year to be some virtuous person. Well, I think what they did is, you put it to the government, hooray, you're really good. I couldn't believe that they elected her as the epitome of.
I have a very crude idea about the reference point problem. Okay, I don't have any solution, of course. I never thought about this through, so I don't know. But I thought, in conclusion, I think it's very difficult to determine. And my ideas come from the Easterling paradox. Easterling paradox. It means that it's about the happiness, right? We know that in cross-sectional data, the rich country usually, or rich group of people, usually compared to the poor country, they have a higher level of happiness. But if we look at the time series data for example, the United States, for example, this year, 2018, and compare the happiness to the American people back to 1940. If we have the data, if we have the survey, and basically, no much change. And I didn't really do the academic research on this, but my intuition is that there is also reference point here, and it's in terms of time series, it could be moving, and in terms of cross-sectional level, for example, for the same air quality, for example, for some country, the reference air quality could be, you mean very bad. I said very bad, and in other countries could be very high. And we just don't know, if, for example, exactly in China compared to China and United States, the reference air quality, I believe in China is lower. So, but we don't know exactly in what range that's for example, the reference point for the air quality in China. So I don't know whether I get the point correctly. I never thought about this, but I just it just come to me. So.
No, that's a good point. And I think it really is an argument for what I've been suggesting, that we could argue like this forever and we wouldn't settle it. We need some way to, quote, objectively, as objective as we could make it, and as accurate as we could make it, way of determining and settling this argument. Is the reference point dirtier air in China than it is in Vancouver? I don't know. But if we had, if what we're suggesting works, maybe we'd have a way. And that would be really great if we could do it. Because otherwise we're going to end up just like we're doing here, just arguing forever. And finally, whoever has the loudest voice or the most money or whatever is going to win. Just like we do most things in life. Maybe we could do a little better here. Now, I think, for example, the benefit cost analysis is a really useful tool. By the way, it's not necessarily only the numbers that come out of a benefit cost analysis that are so important. I think equally and maybe even more important is getting people to recognize this are the benefits, this are the costs, to figure out what the devil is going on with this project. Because now it's just, when you read the papers and so forth, it's a mess. But a benefit cost analysis makes people, the analysts, say, this is a benefit, this is a benefit, that's a cost, this is a cost. Identify it. Whether you get the right numbers to do it, better to get better numbers, of course. But there's enormous value in simply setting up the numbers, the columns in a benefit cost analysis. It just clarifies the mind a lot to get us real definition of what is a cost, what's a benefit, and so forth and so on. So that I've always viewed that as a major part of the benefit of doing a benefit cost analysis. And so much of policy analysis, the more we can sort of do that. Now, I'm not arguing that a benefit cost analysis ought to be a decision analysis, a decision document. I'm not arguing that. A benefit cost analysis may tell you this project is a really good project and you ought to do it. It's got big benefits and small cost, but all the benefits accrue to one person. Do you want to build that project? Probably not. So I'm not arguing, that just because a benefit cost analysis says that the benefits are bigger than the cost, that you ought to build it. Although I think you ought to consider that very, very strongly. I think, if you've done a proper benefit cost analysis, this is very valuable in telling you that this is probably a good idea or a bad idea. I think, I've always thought, I've worked for government agencies that did benefit cost analysis and this sort of thing. Most things in life are very clearly good ideas, good things, or bad things. There are a few in the middle, of course, but not many. So the numbers don't have to be, 3 decimal places accurate. Most things, once you sort of think about them, it's obvious whether it's a good idea. I think I mentioned before that I worked for a government agency that built dams, Tennessee Valley Authority in the U.S. And we were on the same floor, the economists were on the same floor as the sort of project planners. The project planners were the guys that dreamt up new projects to build, new dams, new whatevers. And we used to go to coffee and lunch with these guys because we're on the same floor and we got to know each other quite well. And one time a bunch of us were sitting around at lunch, and this guy went on and on about how wonderful he thought it would be if they built a series of dams on the upper reaches of the Tennessee River across through some gaps in the mountains to a town called Asheville, North Carolina. That this would create a navigation channel that would really help the community and would create enormous benefits. He just thought this was a wonderful, not just one dam, it was 3 or 4 dams, I think, that he had in mind in this thing. And so we said, we sort of sat down around the table at lunch and literally on napkins said, well, how much do dams normally cost this big? Well, these guys, they could give you a ballpark. It's going to cost this much to build a dam about this big, and you'd need a dam about this big on this river and this sort of thing. So we sort of tracked up these sort of things. And then we said, well, the benefits are going to be largely navigational benefits and some power and so forth. What do you think the power is? So, without getting up from the table at lunch to consult anything, these guys had ballpark estimates to do this. And after about an hour or two of arguing around and looking at the numbers and sitting down, it was so obvious the only way that they could possibly justify building those dams was having barges, 10 abreast, going faster than any barge has ever gone before constantly. I mean, it was totally ludicrous to think that that could possibly be a justifiable series of projects. And I never heard another word from those guys about those kind of projects. And it was, I think there were 3 economists sitting with probably 3 or 4 of these guys and just going through the numbers. It was so obviously a bad idea that once you started putting even the roughest numbers down, it was clear this is a dumb idea. And I think most of life is like that, in the sense that most things are pretty dumb or pretty good things to do. There are a lot of things in the middle, of course, but most things just fall out once you sort of organize your thoughts. And that's why I think benefit cost analysis is so useful. It forces you to organize the information. How much do you have to make it a paying proposition kind of thing? So life isn't quite as complicated as it sometimes appears.
Sometimes life is very simple.
Yeah. Or sometimes we just ignore the complications of life as well. Are we due for? Okay, we're due for coffee. So what do we?